Welcome to this journey through one of the most disturbing phenomena to emerge from the shadows of modern folklore. Tell us where you're watching from now, because this story will unsettle you in a way few other accounts can, not through violence or bloodshed, but through something far more primal, the violation of what we instinctively recognize as human. We're about to delve into a mystery that began in the dying days of the 20th century, where children with eyes like midnight voids appeared on doorsteps across America and beyond, leaving a legacy so profoundly unsettling that witnesses have spent decades trying to rationalize what they saw. This is not a tale of monsters in the traditional sense. This is something that wears the mask of innocence, that speaks with the voice of childhood, that stands at your door and asks to be let inside. It was the year 1996. The internet was still young, wild, unregulated, a frontier where information and misinformation blended like oil and water, swirling but never quite mixing. The World Wide Web had only recently become accessible to ordinary people, and with it came new ways of sharing stories, new methods of spreading fear. In small towns across America and Britain, the situation was peculiarly isolated. Despite growing connectivity, communities remained surprisingly separate, their local experiences contained within their own borders. Until one journalist made a decision that would transform localized terror into a global phenomenon. But this story doesn't begin with the internet. It begins with a reporter sitting in his car on a warm Texas evening, watching his rear-view mirror with growing dread. The street was empty, absolutely empty, and yet he could hear them approaching, two children, walking with deliberate, measured steps, coming closer to his driver's side window, their footfalls echoing with unnatural clarity in the summer stillness. What happened next would spawn thousands of reports, hundreds of terrified witnesses, dozens of theories ranging from the supernatural to the psychological. And at the center of it all would be a single, haunting question that no one has satisfactorily answered. What are the black-eyed children? Abilene, Texas, 1996. A city of approximately 100,000 souls, situated in the heart of West Texas, where the landscape stretches flat and endless beneath skies so vast they seem to swallow the horizon. This was not a place known for strangeness. It was a working city, practical, grounded in the realities of oil, agriculture, and the steady rhythms of ordinary American life. Brian Bethel was a reporter for the Abilene Reporter News, 20-something years old, ambitious, methodical in his approach to journalism. He prided himself on skepticism, on verifying sources, on the careful separation of fact from fiction that defined professional reporting. He was not, by any measure, a man predisposed to flights of fancy or supernatural belief. On an evening in January 1996, Bethel sat in his car in a parking lot near a movie theater, writing a check to pay his internet bill. This detail matters. The mundanity of it matters. He was engaged in the most prosaic of tasks, his attention focused on the careful formation of numbers and letters, when a knock came at his driver's side window. The sound was sharp, deliberate, demanding. He looked up to see two boys standing beside his car. They appeared to be between 10 and 14 years old, dressed in hooded pullovers that seemed oddly heavy for the Texas climate. One boy was slightly taller than the other. Both wore expressions of calculated politeness that Bethel would later describe as rehearsed, almost scripted. The taller boy spoke through the closed window. His voice was muffled but clear enough. They needed a ride, he explained. They wanted to see a movie. Mortal Kombat was playing at the theater, but they'd forgotten their money at home. Could they please get a ride to retrieve it? It would only take a moment. They lived very close by. Bethel felt something immediately wrong. Not danger in the traditional sense, no threat of violence, no aggressive posturing. Something else, something that operated below conscious thought, triggering ancient alarm systems buried deep in the human brain. He found himself reaching for the door lock. His hand moved of its own accord, fingers closing around the mechanism. And in that moment, he made the mistake of looking directly at the boys' faces. Later, Bethel would struggle to articulate what he saw. Words failed him repeatedly in subsequent retellings. The boys' eyes were completely black, not dark brown, not shadowed by poor lighting. Black, utterly, absolutely black. No whites, no irises, no pupils. Just solid expanses of darkness that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. The terror that seized him was instantaneous and overwhelming. His rational mind, the journalist's mind, trained to observe and analyze, shut down completely, replaced by something far more primitive. Every nerve in his body screamed a single, urgent command. Asterisk, do not let them in. Asterisk, the taller boy knocked again. More insistently this time. Come on, mister, he said. His voice carried an edge now, a tone that suggested his patience was wearing thin. We need to come in. We can't get in unless you let us. That phrasing. Asterisk can't get in unless you let us. Asterisk not won't, asterisk can't. Asterisk as if some fundamental rule prevented them from entering without explicit permission. Bethel's hand trembled on the door lock, and here is where the account becomes truly disturbing. He found himself wanting to unlock the door. Despite his terror, despite every instinct screaming warnings, some part of him felt compelled to comply. The urge was almost overwhelming, like fighting against a powerful current pulling him toward rocks. But he didn't unlock the door. Instead, he turned the key in the ignition with shaking hands and drove away, watching in his rear-view mirror as the two boys stood motionless in the parking lot, watching his car disappear into the Texas night. They didn't wave, didn't shout, didn't display any emotion whatsoever. They simply stood there, two small figures with eyes like empty wells, growing smaller in the mirror until distance swallowed them completely. Bethel drove home in a state of profound disorientation. His hands wouldn't stop shaking. His heart hammered against his ribs with painful intensity. For hours afterward, he couldn't shake the feeling that he'd narrowly escaped something catastrophic, not death, exactly, but something perhaps worse. Something that would have fundamentally altered what he was. He didn't sleep that night. Every creak of his house, every shadow in his peripheral vision sent adrenaline coursing through his system. And as the hours passed and dawn approached, Bethel made a decision that would transform his personal nightmare into a cultural phenomenon. He would write about it, not as a news story. His editor would never approve such a piece for the paper. But the internet was different. The internet was a place where people shared strange experiences, where the boundaries between journalism and personal testimony blurred into something new and undefined. Bethel composed his account carefully, methodically, using all his reporter's skills to recreate the encounter with precision. He posted it to a Ghost Stories mailing list, a small corner of the early internet where people exchanged tales of the paranormal and unexplained. He expected, perhaps, a few responses, some sympathy, maybe a rational explanation that would help him process what he'd experienced. What he got instead was something entirely different. Within days, his inbox flooded with messages. Dozens at first, then hundreds. People from across the United States and beyond, writing to tell him they'd experienced the same thing. Different locations, different years, but the same children, the same solid black eyes, the same feeling of overwhelming dread, the same insistent need to be invited inside. A woman in Vermont described two girls appearing at her rural farmhouse at 3 in the morning, asking to use the phone. Their eyes were completely black. She'd slammed the door and called the police, but by the time officers arrived, the girls had vanished without a trace. A man in Oregon recounted opening his door to what appeared to be a young boy selling magazines for a school fundraiser. The child's pitch was oddly stilted, like someone reciting memorized lines. When the man looked more carefully at the boy's face, he saw those same black eyes and immediately shut the door. For weeks afterward, he claimed, he'd wake at night with the certainty that someone was standing outside his bedroom window. A family in rural England reported a knock at their door during a storm. Two children stood on their doorstep, soaking wet, asking to come inside to warm up. Something about them felt wrong. The father, acting on instinct, told them to wait while he got towels. When he returned moments later, they were gone. No footprints in the mud. No sign they'd ever been there at all. But his 6-year-old daughter, who'd glimpsed them from the stairs, had nightmares for months afterward. She drew pictures of the dark-eyed children, repeatedly, always the same image. Two figures with holes where their eyes should be. The accounts shared disturbing consistencies. The children always appeared in pairs, occasionally in groups of 3 or 4, but never alone. They consistently requested entry or assistance, rides, phone calls, permission to come inside. Their speech patterns were described as strange, too formal, too scripted, lacking natural rhythm. And always, witnesses reported the same overwhelming fear, the same instinctive recognition that these entities, whatever they were, should not be admitted or accommodated. But perhaps most disturbing was the temporal spread of the reports. As Bethel's account circulated and more people came forward, patterns emerged that suggested this phenomenon predated 1996 by decades. An elderly woman wrote about an encounter in 1950's rural Mississippi. A retired military officer described black-eyed children appearing at his barracks window in Germany during the 1970s. These weren't new entities. They'd been appearing for generations, their encounters scattered and isolated, never cohering into a recognizable pattern. Until the internet gave them a name, black-eyed children, black-eyed kids, BECs, the phenomenon now had an identity. And with that identity came something far more complex than simple folklore. It sparked a cascade of questions that demanded investigation, analysis, understanding. Were these encounters real? Were they mass hysteria facilitated by internet connectivity? Were they something else entirely, something that existed in the liminal space between objective reality and collective consciousness? To answer those questions, we must go deeper. We must examine not just the encounters themselves, but the psychology of the witnesses, the sociology of belief, and the strange patterns that emerge when fear takes on narrative form. The human mind is a pattern recognition machine. We evolved to see connections, to anticipate threats based on incomplete information, to construct narratives that make sense of chaotic sensory input. This ability kept our ancestors alive on prehistoric savannas. But in the modern world, it can also lead us astray, causing us to see significance in coincidence, to perceive intention in randomness. Understanding the black-eyed children requires understanding this fundamental aspect of human cognition. Because what happened after Brian Bethel's account went public demonstrates both the power and the complexity of collective narrative building in the Internet age. Dr. David Clark, a folklore researcher at Sheffield Hallam University, has spent years studying urban legends and their propagation. His work on the black-eyed children phenomenon provides crucial context. According to Clark's research, Internet-era legends differ from traditional folklore in one critical way. They spread with unprecedented speed and evolve in real time, shaped by thousands of contributors rather than slow generational retelling. But speed of propagation doesn't automatically equal fabrication. Clark emphasizes a crucial point. Many witnesses reported their encounters before encountering Bethel's account or even knowing such a phenomenon had a name. These pre-narrative encounters, experiences that occurred in isolation, without a cultural framework to interpret them, are particularly significant from an investigative standpoint. Consider the account of Caris Holdsworth, a journalist from Britain who came forward in 2013 with an experience from 1982, 14 years before Bethel's Texas encounter. Holdsworth's account is notable for its detail and its author's professional skepticism. It was a winter evening in Cannock, Staffordshire. Holdsworth, then a teenager, was walking home from a friend's house through a residential area when she encountered two girls standing beneath a street lamp. They appeared to be around 8 or 9 years old, wearing old-fashioned dresses that seemed inappropriate for the cold weather. What struck Holdsworth immediately was their stillness. Children that age are rarely completely still. They fidget, shift weight, display the constant movements of young bodies full of energy. These girls were motionless as statues. As Holdsworth approached, one of the girls turned to face her. In the amber glow of the street lamp, Holdsworth saw the girl's eyes, or rather, the absence of eyes as she understood them. Solid black orbs that reflected the streetlight with an oily sheen. Holdsworth froze. The girl smiled, a wide, inappropriate smile that didn't reach those black eyes, and took a step forward. "Are you coming with us?" she asked. Her voice was high, pitched but oddly flat, emotionless. Holdsworth ran. She sprinted the remaining distance to her house, slammed the door, and locked it with shaking hands. For years afterward, she told no one about the encounter, convinced people would think her crazy or that she'd somehow imagined the entire thing. It was only decades later, when she stumbled across internet accounts of black-eyed children, that she realized others had seen the same entities. This pattern, witnesses remaining silent for years or decades before discovering they weren't alone, appears repeatedly in BK accounts. A security guard in Nevada reported an encounter from 1994 only in 2009. A woman in Australia described an experience from her childhood in the 1970s, reporting it only after her adult daughter read about the phenomenon and asked if she'd ever seen anything similar. These delayed reports complicate the narrative of Internet, facilitated mass hysteria. If the phenomenon were purely mimetic, an idea that spreads and replicates like a virus, we would expect reports to cluster after 1996, concentrated in Internet-connected populations. Instead, we find a temporal distribution that predates the Internet by decades and a geographic spread that includes locations with limited early Internet access. But correlation is not causation, and investigative rigor demands we examine alternative explanations. Dr. Stuart Appel, a psychologist specializing in anomalous experiences, offers several frameworks for understanding BK encounters. The first is sleep paralysis and hypnagogic hallucinations. During the transition between sleep and waking, the brain can generate vivid, terrifying hallucinations while the body remains paralyzed. These episodes frequently involve a sense of presence, of entities in the room, and intense fear. Could BK encounters be elaborate hypnagogic episodes? The problem with this explanation is that most BK encounters occur during full waking consciousness, often in public locations. Bethel was writing a check in a parking lot. Holdsworth was walking home in full daylight. These aren't the conditions that produce sleep paralysis. A second explanation involves pareidolia and suggestion. Human brains are hardwired to recognize faces, sometimes seeing them in random patterns: clouds, wood grain, Mars rock formations. Could witnesses be misinterpreting normal children under unusual lighting conditions, their perception warped by shadows and expectation? This explanation struggles with the consistency of reports. Pareidolia produces diverse experiences. People see different things in the same stimuli. BK encounters, by contrast, display remarkable uniformity. Black eyes with no visible whites, formal speech patterns, requests for invitation, overwhelming fear response. This level of consistency suggests either genuine pattern or coordinated fabrication. Which brings us to the third explanation: Foley, Plusieurs, or shared delusional disorder, amplified by internet connectivity. Could BK encounters be a form of mass psychogenic illness, where exposure to the idea generates genuine psychological experiences that manifest as perceived encounters? Dr. Robert Bartholomew, a medical sociologist who studies collective delusions, suggests this is the most probable explanation. According to Bartholomew, the Internet created perfect conditions for a mass psychogenic episode. A compelling initial account, Bethel's, establishes a template. Suggestible individuals, primed by reading this account, misinterpret ambiguous stimuli or generate false memories that conform to the template. These secondary accounts reinforce the phenomenon's reality, encouraging more reports in a self-perpetuating cycle. This explanation is compelling. It accounts for the temporal clustering around 1996 and the subsequent explosion of reports. It doesn't require supernatural entities or elaborate conspiracies, but it doesn't account for everything. It doesn't explain the pre-1996 encounters reported by individuals who'd never heard of the phenomenon. It doesn't address the consistency of the fear response. Witnesses consistently describe the most intense terror of their lives, often accompanied by physiological symptoms: racing heart, trembling, nausea that persist long after the encounter. And it doesn't explain certain disturbing patterns that emerge from detailed analysis of the reports. Let's examine those patterns more carefully. Geographic clustering stands out immediately. While BK encounters are reported globally, certain locations generate disproportionate numbers of reports. The Pacific Northwest, particularly Oregon and Washington, rural New England, especially Vermont and New Hampshire, Central England, particularly the Midlands, remote areas of Australia. These aren't the regions with highest population density or greatest internet connectivity. They're characterized instead by isolation, by communities separated from urban centers, by landscapes that preserve dark spaces untouched by constant light pollution. Temporal clustering also appears. Reports spike during specific periods: 1996-1998, following Bethel's account; 2008-2010, during early social media spread; and 2012-2014, when BK content went viral on YouTube and Reddit. But within those spikes, smaller patterns emerge. A disproportionate number of encounters occur during transitional times: dusk and dawn, the liminal hours when light and darkness battle for supremacy. Many occur during weather events: storms, fog, unusual atmospheric conditions that distort perception and create unease. The children themselves display consistent characteristics beyond their black eyes. They typically appear between ages 8 and 16, with most reports clustering around pre-adolescence. They dress anachronistically: hoodies in summer, formal clothes in informal settings, styles that seem slightly out of step with contemporary fashion. Their behavior is universally described as off, too controlled, too deliberate, lacking the spontaneity of genuine children. And then there are the requests, always requests, never demands. The children ask to be let in, to use a phone, to get a ride. They seek invitation, permission, as if bound by rules that prevent them from acting without consent. This detail fascinates folklorists because it echoes vampire mythology, entities that must be invited across thresholds. But it also resonates with other traditions, fairy lore, where the good folk require permission to enter homes, jinn stories, where spirits must be willingly admitted, even Christian demonology, where demonic entities theoretically require invitation to possess or harm. Are we witnessing genuine folklore transmission? A modern manifestation of ancient fears wearing contemporary clothing, or something else entirely? To explore this question, we must examine several high-profile encounters in detail, looking for elements that might illuminate the phenomenon's true nature. The Stull Cemetery Encounter 2012 ** Stull. Kansas is a town of approximately 20 residents, known primarily for its allegedly haunted cemetery. In October 2012, 3 college students drove to Stull Cemetery around midnight as a Halloween adventure. Amateur ghost hunters, equipped with cameras and recording equipment, they intended to document any paranormal activity. What they documented instead has never been satisfactorily explained. Their footage shows them exploring the cemetery in darkness, using flashlights to illuminate weathered headstones. At approximately 1:15 a.m., one of the students, we'll call him Marcus, notices movement near the tree line. He turns his camera toward it. 2 children emerge from the darkness. The footage quality is poor, heavily compressed from uploading and re-uploading, but certain details are visible. Both children appear to be boys, perhaps 10 years old, wearing what looks like depression, narrow clothing, cloth caps, suspenders, knickers. They walk with unnaturally smooth gaits, their movements weirdly synchronized. Marcus calls out, asking what they're doing in the cemetery at night. The children don't respond immediately. They continue walking forward with that same eerie synchronization until they're approximately 10 feet from the student's position. Then one speaks. "We'd like to join your group," he says. His voice is flat, affectless. "You need to invite us." The footage becomes chaotic here. The camera jerks violently as Marcus apparently steps backward. Another student, a woman named Sarah, can be heard screaming. The third student shouts, "Look at their eyes. Jesus Christ, look at their eyes." The camera swings back to the children. For just 3 frames, less than 1/10 of a second, there's a clear shot of one child's face. The image is blurry, pixelated, but what appears to be solid black eyes is visible. Then the footage cuts. When it resumes, the students are running through the cemetery toward their car, the camera bouncing wildly. Panicked breathing and shouted curses comprise the audio. They reach the vehicle, pile in, and drive away at high speed. The encounter lasted less than 2 minutes, but its aftermath stretched for years. Marcus dropped out of college the following semester, moved back to his hometown, and has refused all interview requests. Sarah developed severe anxiety and spent time in psychiatric care. The third student maintains public silence about the experience. The footage they captured has been analyzed extensively by video forensics experts. Some claim digital manipulation. Others argue the poor quality makes definitive conclusions impossible. A few researchers note that the children's movement patterns that synchronized fluid motion display properties inconsistent with typical human walking gaits. What nobody disputes is that the students genuinely experienced intense terror. Whatever they encountered in Stull Cemetery, whether objective reality or collective hallucination, produced profound psychological trauma. ***, the Las Vegas apartment incident 2014, ***, a family in Las Vegas, father, mother, 2 young daughters, reported an encounter that spans multiple nights and includes unusual physical evidence. It began in March 2014 when the father, a casino worker named Thomas Rivera, answered a knock at their apartment door around 10 p.m. 2 boys stood in the hallway, perhaps 12 years old, wearing matching hoodies despite the desert heat. They asked if his daughters could come out to play. Rivera found the request strange. His daughters were 6 and 8 years old, too young to be supervised by 12-year-old strangers at night. He told the boys no and began closing the door. That's when he saw their eyes, completely black, reflecting the hallway fluorescent lighting with an oily sheen. Rivera slammed the door and locked it. His wife, hearing the commotion, came to investigate. Rivera struggled to explain what he'd seen, aware of how insane it sounded. But that night, at approximately 2 a.m., knocking began again. Persistent, rhythmic knocking that continued for nearly 20 minutes. Rivera didn't open the door. Instead, he looked through the peephole. The boys stood in the hallway, staring directly at the door. Motionless, waiting. This pattern repeated for 5 consecutive nights. The boys appeared at different times, sometimes early evening, sometimes after midnight. Always the same knock. Always the same patient waiting when Rivera refused to answer. On the 6th night, Rivera's 6-year-old daughter woke screaming. She claimed 2 boys were standing in her bedroom, asking her to come with them. Rivera searched the apartment thoroughly. All windows were closed and locked from the inside. All doors were secured. No evidence of intrusion existed. But his daughter drew pictures of what she'd seen. 2 figures with solid black circles for eyes, reaching toward her bed. Rivera installed security cameras facing his apartment door. The knocking stopped immediately afterward. He reviewed the footage from previous nights, but found nothing unusual. Just empty hallway, no visitors. Yet his recordings confirmed the knocking sounds. Audio waveforms showed clear, rhythmic impacts at the times Rivera reported encounters. How could knocking be recorded without any visible source? Rivera moved his family to a different apartment complex within the month. He's never reported further encounters, but his daughter still sleeps with lights on, still wakes with nightmares about the boys with dark eyes who want me to go with them. ***, the Portland Researcher Confrontation 2015 ***, not all encounters involve passive witnesses. In 2015, a Portland-based paranormal researcher named Ellen Creed deliberately sought BK encounters. Her approach was methodical, camping in locations with high BK report density, making herself visible and accessible during known high-activity periods, dusk, storms, transitional weather. For months, nothing happened. Then, on a foggy November evening in a rural area east of Portland, 2 children approached her campsite. Creed was prepared. She'd set up multiple cameras, audio recording equipment, electromagnetic field detectors, standard paranormal investigation apparatus. She'd also established strict protocols. She would engage verbally, but would not invite the children anywhere, touch them, or allow them within 5 feet of her position. The children emerged from fog, so thick Creed couldn't see more than 15 feet in any direction. A girl and a boy, perhaps 13 years old, wearing jeans and hoodies that appeared damp from condensation. They walked into her campsite with casual confidence, as if their presence was expected. Creed initiated her protocol. She asked their names, where they lived, what they were doing alone in remote woods at dusk. Her voice recorder captured the exchange. "We need your help," the girl said. Her voice was flat, emotionless. "We're lost. Our parents are looking for us. Can we use your phone?" Creed noted that she didn't have cell service at her location. Could they describe their parents, where they'd gotten separated? The boy smiled. The expression looked wrong. Creed reported too wide, too fixed, muscles moving but face somehow unanimated. "You should invite us to sit by your fire," he said. "We're very cold." Creed's EMF detector, which had been quiescent all evening, suddenly spiked dramatically. Her digital thermometer registered a drop of 12 degrees in less than 30 seconds, despite her proximity to the campfire. She asked the children to step into better light so she could see their faces clearly. They complied, moving with that characteristic synchronized motion other witnesses described. And in the direct glow of her lantern, Creed saw their eyes, solid black, utterly black, absorbing light rather than reflecting it. Creed maintained her protocols. She asked directly, "What are you?" The girl tilted her head at an angle that seemed biomechanically impossible, too far, too fast, like a bird studying prey. "We're children," she said, "lost children. Won't you help us?" Creed's voice recorder captured what happened next, though she admits her memory of it is fragmented, dreamlike. She felt an overwhelming compulsion to invite them closer, to offer assistance, to help these lost children. The urge was so strong she actually stood up, took a step toward them. Then her hand brushed her campfire, and pain shocked her back to alertness. She stumbled backward, away from the children, and shouted, "No, leave." The fog swallowed them instantly. One moment they stood in her campsite, the next they were gone. No footprints marked their exit. No sounds of movement through underbrush. Simply gone. Creed's recording equipment captured anomalies she still can't explain. Temperature drops with no environmental cause. EMF spikes that don't correspond to any known source. And voices, child voices, whispering beneath the audible conversation. Her audio engineer, analyzing the recordings, isolated at least 4 distinct voices layered beneath the 2 children's speech. The whispered words were repetitive: "Let us in, let us in, let us in." But the cameras captured nothing unusual. Empty campsite, fog, Creed talking to empty air. Either the entities registered on audio but not video, or Creed experienced a vivid hallucination, while environmental factors coincidentally produced the recorded anomalies. Neither explanation satisfies completely. We've reached the point where investigation must yield to interpretation. The accounts exist. The witnesses, hundreds of them now, from diverse backgrounds and locations, report consistent experiences. The question is no longer asterisk whether asterisk something is happening, but asterisk what asterisk is happening. Let's examine the competing theories with the rigor they deserve. Asterisk Theory 1. Psychological phenomenon asterisk. The most conservative explanation holds that BK encounters are purely psychological hallucinations, misperceptions, false memories, or mass psychogenic illness amplified by internet connectivity. Dr. Christopher French, a psychologist specializing in anomalous experiences at Goldsmiths University, advocates this position. According to French, the human brain is remarkably susceptible to suggestion and capable of generating vivid, seemingly real experiences that have no external basis. Sleep paralysis is well documented. Hypnagogic and hypnopompic hallucinations occur in up to 40% of the population. Under stress, anxiety, or expectation, the brain can construct elaborate false memories that feel completely genuine to the experiencer. Add internet, facilitated narrative templates, and you have all necessary ingredients for a mass phenomenon without requiring external entities. French points to several supporting factors. First, the dramatic increase in reports following Bethel's 1996 account and subsequent media coverage. This temporal clustering suggests idiogenic contagion, the spread of ideas that generate physical or psychological responses. Second, the lack of physical evidence. No photographs clearly show black-eyed children. No medical examinations have documented individuals with completely black eyes, excluding cosmetic modifications like scleral tattoos or contact lenses. No BK has ever been apprehended, studied, or explained through conventional means. Third, the consistency of reports works against supernatural explanation. If genuine paranormal entities existed, we'd expect more variation. Ghosts appear differently to different witnesses. UFO reports vary wildly in description, but BK accounts are remarkably uniform, suggesting cultural transmission of a standard narrative. French also notes the phenomenon's cultural specificity. BK reports cluster in Western, internet-connected populations. They're rare in cultures without exposure to the internet or Western media. This distribution pattern is exactly what we'd expect from a culturally constructed phenomenon, not a universal supernatural entity. This theory is intellectually rigorous and scientifically sound. It requires no violation of physical laws, no acceptance of unverifiable claims. It treats witnesses with respect while maintaining skepticism about extraordinary claims requiring extraordinary evidence. But it struggles with certain details. It doesn't easily explain pre-1996 encounters reported by witnesses who had no exposure to the BK narrative. Caris Holdsworth's 1982 experience, documented through personal journals written at the time, predates the phenomenon's birth by 14 years. Similar early encounters exist in fragmentary form: notes in diaries, mentions in family letters, references in old newspaper articles about strange children, that only make sense in retrospect. It also doesn't fully account for the intensity and consistency of the fear response. False memories and hallucinations can certainly generate fear, but witnesses consistently describe the most intense terror of their lives: visceral, overwhelming panic that persists for years and frequently requires therapy to process. This level of response seems disproportionate if the encounters have no external basis. And it leaves unexplained the audio and environmental anomalies documented in cases like Ellen Creed's investigation, EMF spikes, temperature drops, layered voices beneath audible speech. These could be coincidental or equipment malfunction, but the consistent pattern across multiple independent investigations suggests something more systematic. Theory 2. Paranormal entity at the opposite extreme lies the supernatural explanation. BK are genuine entities, spirits, demons, interdimensional beings, or something else entirely, that exist independently of human perception and occasionally interact with our reality. Proponents of this theory, including various paranormal researchers and cryptozoologists, argue that folklore and mythology worldwide contain references to similar entities. The consistency of BK characteristics across cultures and time periods suggests a real phenomenon that different societies have interpreted through their own cultural frameworks. They point to several supporting elements. First, the historical precedents. Accounts of strange children with unusual eyes appear in folklore globally. Japanese mythology describes the Aburakego, a child spirit with distinctive eyes that drinks lamp oil. European folklore is replete with changeling stories, fairy children substituted for human babies, often described as wrong in subtle but unmistakable ways. Celtic traditions speak of the Sluag, spirits of the restless dead who appear as children to lure victims. These traditions predate internet connectivity by centuries or millennia. Second, the invitation requirement. BK consistently need permission to enter homes, to get rides, to access phones. This suggests rules binding their behavior, limitations consistent with various supernatural traditions. Vampires require invitation across thresholds. Jinn need consent to interact with humans. Demons must be voluntarily welcomed to possess individuals. The consistency across mythologies suggests archetypal truth, not coincidence. Third, witness credibility. Many BK encounters involve multiple witnesses simultaneously. Groups seeing the same entities, experiencing identical fear responses, corroborating identical details. Mass hallucination occurs but is relatively rare. Simultaneous detailed hallucinations matching precisely across multiple individuals is extraordinarily improbable without external stimulus. The paranormal theory also accommodates the pre-internet accounts more naturally. If BK are real entities that have existed for extended periods, scattered historical encounters make perfect sense. The internet didn't create the phenomenon. It merely provided infrastructure for isolated witnesses to recognize pattern. But this theory faces significant challenges. Most fundamentally, it violates parsimony Occam's razor. If a phenomenon can be explained without invoking supernatural entities, that explanation should be preferred. The paranormal theory requires acceptance of entities that operate outside known physical laws, leave no trace evidence, and somehow avoid documentation despite millions of cameras and sensors distributed globally. It also struggles with the absence of physical evidence. If BK are corporeal entities, they should be detectable through conventional means. They should leave fingerprints, DNA, photographic evidence. They should appear on security cameras and motion sensors. Yet despite thousands of reported encounters, not a single BK has been captured on clear video, photographed in detail, or studied scientifically. The paranormal explanation also fails to account for the phenomenon's cultural specificity and temporal clustering. Why would supernatural entities suddenly increase activity dramatically in 1996? Why would they target predominantly Western English-speaking populations? These patterns suggest cultural construction rather than genuine entity interaction. Theory 3. Hybrid explanation ***. Some researchers propose a middle path that acknowledges both psychological and potentially anomalous elements. Dr. Jeffrey Kripal, a religious studies professor at Rice University, suggests that phenomena like BK encounters might represent imaginal experiences, events occurring in a realm between pure hallucination and objective reality. According to this framework, human consciousness isn't purely contained within individual brains. Instead, it interfaces with something larger, collective, unconscious, morphic fields, or dimensions we don't yet understand. BK encounters might represent moments when this interface produces experiences that are simultaneously subjective and supersubjective, real to the experiencer but not measurable through conventional instruments. This theory draws on quantum physics concepts about observer effects and consciousness's role in collapsing probability waves. It references Carl Jung's work on archetypes and the collective unconscious. It attempts to reconcile witness testimony with lack of physical evidence by suggesting the encounters occur in experiential rather than purely physical space. It's intellectually fascinating, but ultimately unfalsifiable. If experiences occur in unmeasurable dimensions, they remain forever beyond scientific verification or refutation. This makes the theory philosophically interesting, but practically useless for investigation. Theory 4. Sociological interpretation, a final framework, approaches BK from sociological rather than supernatural or psychological angles. Dr. Michael Kinsella, a folklorist at the University of Missouri, suggests the phenomenon represents contemporary society's anxieties manifesting as narrative. According to Kinsella, BK embodies specific modern fears: fear of children as potential threats rather than innocents, fear of invasion of domestic space, fear of the unknown disguised as the familiar, fear of losing control through consent to external forces. These anxieties intensified during the 1990s as crime panic, stranger danger narratives, and millennium anxiety peaked. BK stories in this reading function as modern folklore narratives that encode and transmit cultural anxieties, providing frameworks for processing fear. The encounters themselves may or may not be real in conventional sense, but their function is genuine. They allow communities to articulate and manage collective psychological stress. This theory explains the temporal clustering 1990s anxiety peak, the geographic distribution areas experiencing social stress and isolation, and the narrative consistency folklore required standard elements for effective transmission. It treats witnesses with respect. Their experiences are genuine even if not literally true, while maintaining scientific rigor. But like all theories, it has limitations. It explains the cultural phenomenon better than individual encounters. It doesn't fully account for the physiological responses witnesses report or the environmental anomalies documented in some investigations. So where does this leave us? After examining thousands of reports, analyzing witness testimony, consulting experts across multiple disciplines, what conclusions can we draw? The truth is simultaneously simple and complex. We don't know. We can say with confidence that people are genuinely experiencing something. The reports are too consistent, too detailed, too physiologically impactful to dismiss as simple lies or attention-seeking. Witnesses frequently suffer lasting psychological effects. Their encounters are real experiences, regardless of external cause. We can also say that the phenomenon operates according to patterns, geographic clustering, temporal spikes, consistent characteristics, request-based interactions. These patterns suggest systematic operation rather than random hallucination. But we cannot definitively prove whether BK are psychological phenomena, paranormal entities, cultural constructs, or something entirely different. The evidence allows multiple interpretations, none completely satisfactory. What we can examine is why the phenomenon resonates so powerfully with contemporary consciousness. Why BK have achieved such cultural prominence when other Internet-era legends have faded into obscurity. The psychology of the threshold BK encounters occur almost exclusively at thresholds, doorways, car windows, gates, boundaries between spaces. This detail matters enormously from psychological and anthropological perspectives. Thresholds have occupied special significance in human culture since history. They represent transition points, liminal spaces where the rules governing separate realms meet and blur. Doorways connect inside and outside, private and public, safe and dangerous. They're simultaneously barriers and passages, protection and vulnerability. Every human culture develops threshold rituals. We knock before entering, we wipe our feet, we say welcome, and come in. These aren't arbitrary customs, they're psychological mechanisms for managing the anxiety inherent in allowing external elements into defended space. BK exploit this anxiety perfectly. They appear at thresholds. They request invitation. They cannot or claim they cannot cross without permission. This positions witnesses in the role of gatekeeper, responsible for deciding what enters their protected space. The decision becomes freighted with enormous psychological weight. Saying yes means accepting responsibility for whatever consequences follow. Saying no means potentially condemning children, the cultural symbol of innocence and vulnerability, to suffering. Either choice generates guilt and anxiety. This structure explains the phenomenon's emotional power. BK encounters aren't merely scary. They're psychologically agonizing, forcing witnesses into impossible choices that violate fundamental moral intuitions. Dr. Marion Woodman, a Jungian analyst, suggests BK represent shadow children, projections of aspects of childhood we culturally suppress. Children are supposed to be innocent, spontaneous, emotionally expressive. But real children can be cruel, manipulative, strange. BK embody this shadow aspect, the unsettling truth that children aren't always innocent, that the young can be predatory, that vulnerability and threat can coexist. In this reading, BK encounters force witnesses to confront uncomfortable truths about childhood, innocence, and their own protective instincts. The solid black eyes represent the absence of recognition, looking at a child and seeing nothing familiar, nothing human, nothing that triggers normal protective responses. This interpretation explains why encounters generate such profound distress. They're not just frightening, they're morally and psychologically disorienting, violating fundamental categories we use to navigate social reality. The digital amplification, none of this would matter at cultural scale without the Internet. BK exists as a phenomenon, as opposed to isolated encounters, because digital connectivity allowed pattern recognition across previously isolated experiences. This represents something genuinely new in human history. Traditional folklore evolved slowly, transmitted orally or through limited written accounts, changing gradually across generations. Internet-era folklore evolves in real time, shaped by thousands of contributors, spreading globally within hours. Brian Bethel's account went viral before viral was common terminology. It spread through email lists, websites, forums primitive by modern standards, but revolutionary for 1996. Within months, his experience had reached millions, establishing a narrative template that subsequent witnesses would recognize and reference. This created a feedback loop. As more people learned about BK, more people recognized their own encounters as part of the pattern. This generated more reports, which reached more people, generating more pattern recognition. The phenomenon fed itself, growing exponentially. But here's the crucial question. Did the Internet create the phenomenon, or did it merely reveal something that already existed? The psychological theory suggests creation. The Internet generated a mass psychogenic episode. The paranormal theory suggests revelation. The Internet allowed scattered witnesses to recognize they'd encountered the same entities. The sociological theory suggests both the internet created the narrative while revealing genuine psychological patterns in how we process fear and ambiguity. Evidence exists supporting each interpretation. Pre-internet encounters suggest revelation. Temporal clustering suggests creation. The truth likely involves elements of both genuine psychological experiences, whatever their ultimate cause, amplified and shaped by digital narrative structures. Modern developments and evolution, the BK phenomenon hasn't remained static. As it's spread and evolved, new elements have emerged that complicate simple explanations. In recent years, witnesses report increasingly sophisticated BK behavior. Early accounts describe relatively simple requests, rides, phone use, entry. Contemporary reports involve more complex interactions. BK who know witnesses' names. BK who reference private information. BK who appear in dreams before physical encounters. These developments could suggest psychological deepening. As witnesses become more familiar with the narrative, their experiences elaborate accordingly. Or they could indicate entity learning if BK are real. They might adapt their approaches based on effectiveness. Technology has also complicated the landscape. Modern security systems should document BK encounters definitively. Ring doorbells, motion-activated cameras, smart locks. This infrastructure should capture clear evidence. Yet it doesn't. Reports exist of BK appearing in doorbell camera footage, but these uniformly show ambiguous images, figures with faces in shadow, eyes that might be black or might simply be poorly lit, children who look strange but not definitively anomalous, nothing definitive, nothing that couldn't be explained conventionally. This absence of clear documentation is either damning, suggesting the phenomenon is purely psychological, or mysterious, suggesting whatever BK are, they somehow avoid or interfere with record. In technology, some researchers note that the most compelling encounters involve direct perception witnesses seeing BK with their own eyes, while technological mediation produces ambiguous results. This could indicate perceptual phenomena that technology can't capture, or it could indicate that human perception is unreliable while cameras reveal mundane reality. Social media has also transformed how the phenomenon spreads. YouTube videos about BK have tens of millions of views. TikTok hashtags accumulate billions of impressions. Reddit communities dissect encounters with obsessive detail. This massive exposure means virtually no one in connected populations encounters BK without pre-existing knowledge of what they supposedly are. This contamination of witness pools makes contemporary reports less valuable for investigation. When witnesses know about BK before encountering them, distinguishing genuine anomalous experiences from expectation-driven perception becomes nearly impossible. The question of harm throughout thousands of BK reports, one pattern stands out. These entities apparently haven't harmed anyone physically. No confirmed injuries, no deaths, no physical violence. This detail is crucial for understanding the phenomenon's nature. If BK were predatory entities seeking to harm humans, we'd expect some victims. The absence of confirmed harm suggests either 1. BK can't actually harm people, supporting psychological interpretation. Hallucinated entities can't cause physical damage. 2. BK haven't successfully harmed anyone because witnesses consistently refuse them entry, supporting paranormal interpretation. They require invitation to harm. 3. BK aren't attempting to harm people, suggesting unknown motivation. The psychological harm is undeniable. Witnesses suffer anxiety, paranoia, sleep disturbance, and trauma responses lasting months or years. Some require psychiatric treatment. The experiences, whether externally caused or internally generated, produce genuine psychological injury. But physical harm remains absent. This could be the phenomenon's most important characteristic for determining its nature. Attempting contact, some researchers have attempted proactive contact with BK, seeking encounters under controlled conditions. Ellen Creed's investigation represented one such attempt. Others have followed similar methodologies, camping in high-activity areas, making themselves accessible during reported peak times, using instrumentation to document any encounters. Results have been mixed and frustrating. Most attempts produce nothing. The researchers sit in empty woods or deserted parking lots, experiencing only boredom and cold. It's as if BK appear only when encounters are spontaneous, avoiding deliberate investigation. This pattern supports psychological interpretation. Genuine hallucinations can't be summoned on demand. But it's also consistent with intelligent entities that avoid scientific study. A few researchers report success, though their evidence remains ambiguous. Strange lights, unexplained sounds, feelings of presence, equipment malfunctions, nothing definitive. Nothing that couldn't be explained by environmental factors, equipment failure, or psychological expectation. The frustration is palpable in the research community. Paranormal investigators want clear evidence, photographs, videos, physical traces. Skeptics want clear debunking, caught hoaxes, explained misperceptions. Instead, everyone gets ambiguity. Experiences that feel profound but produce no verifiable evidence. Patterns that suggest something systematic but never quite cohere into proof. This ambiguity might be the phenomenon's defining characteristic. BK exists in the space between real and unreal, documented and undocumented, experienced and unexplainable. We return now to where we began. Brian Bethel sitting in his car in an Abilene parking lot, watching two children with black eyes disappear into the Texas night. That encounter set in motion a cascade of events that transformed isolated experiences into a global phenomenon. It gave voice to witnesses who'd remained silent for decades. It created a framework for understanding experiences that seemed to defy understanding. But has it brought us closer to truth? Perhaps the question itself is flawed. Perhaps BK aren't a puzzle to be solved, but a mirror reflecting our own psychological and cultural landscape. What we see in them, demons, hallucinations, folklore, psychological projection, might reveal more about us than about any external reality. Consider what BK embody: children but wrong, familiar but alien, vulnerable but threatening, requesting help but dangerous to assist. They violate categories, collapsing boundaries we depend on to navigate reality. They're simultaneously sympathetic and terrifying, innocent and predatory. This categorical collapse generates profound psychological dissonance. We're hardwired to protect children, to respond to their vulnerability with nurturing. But we're also hardwired to detect threat, to avoid danger even when it wears familiar faces. BK activate both instincts simultaneously, creating impossible cognitive conflict. Maybe that's the point. Maybe BK, whether psychological phenomenon, cultural construct, or genuine entity, exist to force confrontation with ambiguity, with the limits of our categories and classifications. They remind us that reality doesn't always conform to our expectations, that the familiar can become strange, that safety is always provisional. From this perspective, it doesn't matter whether BK are real, in conventional sense. Their impact is real. The experiences are real. The psychological and cultural work they perform is real. Modern echoes, the BK phenomenon continues evolving. New reports surface weekly on internet forums and social media. The narrative spreads to new populations, new cultures, new contexts. Each retelling adds elements, elaborates details, adapts the core story to local circumstances. Some researchers worry this evolution obscures the phenomenon's origins, burying whatever genuine pattern might exist beneath layers of embellishment and fabrication. Others argue evolution is the point. Folklore has always adapted and changed, shaped by each generation's concerns and contexts. What remains constant is the emotional power. BK stories resonate because they touch something fundamental about human psychology: our fears about innocence, invasion, consent, and the corruption of trust. These are timeless anxieties wearing contemporary costume. In an age of increasing isolation despite technological connection, of eroding social trust, of anxiety about invisible threats, BK provide a narrative framework for processing ambient fear. Their stranger danger for the digital age, updated for populations that encounter more strangers online than in physical space. They also reflect anxieties about childhood itself. Modern Western culture has incredibly complicated relationships with children, simultaneously overprotecting and neglecting, idealized and feared, innocent and precociously mature. BK embody these contradictions, presenting childhood as fundamentally ambiguous, potentially dangerous even in its apparent vulnerability. The unanswered questions despite decades of investigation, fundamental questions remain. Why do BK appear exclusively to some people while others never encounter them despite living in high-activity areas? What determines who experiences these encounters? If BK are psychological phenomena, why such consistency across cultures and time periods? What universal psychological mechanism would generate this specific manifestation? If BK are paranormal entities, why no physical evidence? What properties would allow them to interact with humans while avoiding technological documentation? What would happen if someone actually invited BK inside? Every report involves refusal. Witnesses invariably decline the requests. What prevents someone from accepting, and what would occur if they did? These questions may never find satisfactory answers. BK might remain permanently liminal, experienced but unexplained, documented but unproven, real but unreal. We end this journey where all encounters with the unknown must end, in uncertainty. The story of the black-eyed children is not a story of answers. It's a story of questions, of experiences that resist easy categorization, of witnesses struggling to articulate something that transcends language, of the human need to find pattern and meaning, even especially in the strange and terrifying. If you take nothing else from this account, take this: the witnesses are real. Their experiences, whatever their ultimate cause, are genuine. They've faced something that challenged their understanding of reality, that generated profound fear and lasting psychological impact. Their testimony deserves respect even when we can't determine its truth value. Perhaps someday, technology will advance to the point where these encounters can be documented definitively. Perhaps psychological research will identify the precise mechanisms generating the experiences. Perhaps a BK will be caught on clear video, studied scientifically, explained completely. Or perhaps not. Perhaps some phenomena exist precisely at the boundaries of knowability, in spaces where technology and rationality lose purchase. Perhaps BK will remain forever in the shadows, appearing at thresholds, requesting invitation, vanishing when refused. The black-eyed children have become part of modern folklore, embedded in contemporary culture alongside Slender Man, the Rake, and other digital age legends. They've inspired films, books, television episodes, countless videos and podcasts. They've entered collective consciousness as a recognizable cultural reference. But beyond entertainment and cultural artifact, they represent something more significant, a window into how humans process fear and ambiguity in the digital age. They show how personal experiences become collective narratives, how isolated encounters transform into cultural phenomena, how the internet has fundamentally changed folklore's evolution and transmission. They also demonstrate something profound about human psychology, our need for pattern, for explanation, for narrative frameworks that make sense of confusing experiences. Whether BK are real or psychological, paranormal or cultural, their persistence reveals how desperately we seek meaning in the unknown. To this day, witnesses continue to report encounters. Children with solid black eyes appearing at doors, windows, cars, requesting entry, seeking invitation, generating overwhelming fear in those who see them. The phenomenon hasn't faded. If anything, it's grown stronger, spreading to new populations, adapting to new contexts, evolving with each retelling. And on quiet nights, when ordinary sounds seem somehow significant, when shadows appear darker than they should, people across the world feel a primitive fear spike as they hear unexpected knocking at their doors. They approach the threshold hesitantly, every instinct screaming warnings. They look through the peephole. And sometimes, just sometimes, they see children standing there, waiting, patient, with eyes like midnight voids, absorbing all light, requesting invitation. The story of the black-eyed children remains an unsettling reminder that despite all our technological advancement, despite our scientific knowledge and rational frameworks, the human experience still contains spaces of profound uncertainty, places where the known and unknown collide, generating experiences that resist simple explanation. But questions remain. What are these entities, if entities they are? What drives them to seek invitation so persistently? What would happen if someone finally said yes? These mysteries haunt the imagination, presenting puzzles that may never find resolution. To this day, new reports surface with disturbing regularity. A family in Tennessee describes children knocking on their door at 3 a.m., refusing to leave until police arrive. A driver in Scotland recounts two figures approaching her car at a rest stop, their eyes reflecting her headlights with impossible blackness. A security guard in Tokyo reports children appearing repeatedly on his night shift, always at the building's threshold, always requesting entry. The phenomenon persists, evolves, spreads. And on silent nights, when darkness presses against windows and unfamiliar sounds echo through empty streets, people across the globe pause at unexpected knocking, feeling primal fear spike as they debate whether to look through their peephole. Some do. Some see nothing but empty porches or hallways, and laugh nervously at their own paranoia. Others see children standing there, waiting with inhuman patience, eyes like wells of absolute darkness, absorbing light and hope equally, requesting invitation into spaces where they do not belong. If this journey through one of modern folklore's most disturbing mysteries resonated with you, if you find yourself pondering the boundaries between reality and perception, between psychology and the supernatural, then consider subscribing to the Untold Hour. There are many more stories waiting to be told, mysteries buried in time and contemporary culture that deserve examination with the depth and rigor they demand. Leave a like if this account provoked reflections that go beyond mere entertainment, and comment sharing your own perspectives on what the black-eyed children might represent, whether psychological phenomenon, cultural mirror, or something genuinely beyond our current understanding. Have you encountered something inexplicable? Do you have theories about these mysterious children? Share your thoughts, your experiences, your interpretations. Every voice adds dimension to our collective understanding. Until next time, remember that the world remains far stranger than our frameworks can fully encompass. Some mysteries demand investigation. Others demand respect for their refusal to be solved. This has been the Untold Hour. Stay curious, stay skeptical, and if children with black eyes knock at your door tonight, don't invite them in.